and your family has these same black marks, and your neighbors have these same black marks. And everyone in your neighborhood is dying because of this. And even if you survive from these black marks, you have no social life. And there are 50 million or 2/3 of the population that have passed away from these black marks.
Up to live in the Middle Ages. It's the Black Death. Kids used to be taught that it killed 1/3 of the population of Europe, but latest research suggests it killed slightly more than half, about 50 million people. Scientists and historians keep coming up with new theories to explain the Black Death, but bubonic plague is still the most likely culprit. Bubonic plague, or Yersinia pestis, is a bacteria that lives on the stomach of a flea that lives on the back of rodents. It came from somewhere in Central Asia and reached Europe in 1347. Within 3 years, it's almost everywhere, travelling with ship rats along the busy European shipping lanes. Now, bubonic plague isn't pleasant. After the bacteria enter your bloodstream through a flea bite, they travel to the lymph nodes and multiply. After a few days, you develop a fever and buboes, big, stinking, very painful, pus-filled boils around your armpit, neck or groin. In 60% of cases, you've had it. The lymph node will burst, flooding the bloodstream with deadly bacteria. You'll vomit blood, go delirious, and die from internal hemorrhaging as your major organs start to liquefy. For the people of medieval Europe, this was obviously terrifying and incomprehensible. The church was undermined because priests and monks were shown to be powerless in the face of the plague. And the best clergy, those who had the courage to visit the sick rather than running for the hills like most, were the most likely to die. Peasants, if they survived, often did well because there weren't enough people left to work the land, which meant they could ask for higher wages and there was lots of cheap land for sale. The pandemic known as the Black Death began in 1347 and lasted 4 or 5 years. But plague kept resurfacing. London had its worst outbreak in the 1660s, and the last outbreak in Europe killed half the population of Marseille in 1720. Another pandemic as recently as the 1890s killed about 12 million people, mostly in India and China. And of course, as with most massive disasters from the past, the next recurrence of this or some other lethal pandemic is long overdue.
Imagine the full blame of the disease being pinned on one population. Unfortunately, the Jews fell victim to ethnic hatred due to their better quality of living, which was a result of their religious practices. Unfortunately, this also led to a conspiracy that pinned the full force of the blame on them, and centered the entire disease on them as a source. This is also due to the lack of medical knowledge at the time, and led to the creation of many accusations against the Jews without any proper data. Peasant revolts were also sparked by the inability of the government to suppress the plague, which consequently led to the loss of power for monarchs, nobles, and the papal authority.
Religion definitely had a big effect in the bubonic plague. Many people during this time would focus on the church. Churches, people would be involved in the church more often, and people would basically try to get help from the church to basically recover from this disease. Now the civilians during this time in Europe would basically pay the popes money in order to come inside their house and try to save them and bless them. It sometimes would not work out because popes were kind of scared because the disease was airborne. So sometimes they'd just steal the money and walk out and not go inside people's houses, or the good popes would, and they would go inside and try to do their best, but most likely the next couple of days they would have this disease and this illness. Most popes would die from this disease, so there's a reduction of popes due to this situation. People would basically change their thoughts because of the fact that this would not help. They would change their thoughts about the church, and this would cause in the future a change in religion on the church. People would think God is punishing them, or God worked less on humanity. Well, this could be the case, or they would just lose faith upon the religion. Most likely, why this occurred and why this disease was not recovered is because medicine was abolished. Probably the only way that you could recover from this illness or this disease is because of medicine. Medicine was abolished during this time because basically many churches and popes would believe that it would go against God's will. So due to all these factors, this all had affected most civilians in Europe.
Beyond the religious influences, the plague also had various economic consequences as well as positive influences. The trade spread through the Silk Road trade, and the plague unfortunately originated there. Previous Mongol conquests connecting both Europe as well as Central Asia was one of the main reasons as to why the plague spread. From fleas to rats, towns oftentimes became deserted due to the fact of the high risk of getting contamination from the plague. Trade routes also closed due to long-distance commerce being altered by the fact that the plague was airborne. Airborne illnesses oftentimes spread easily among trade routes, which closed long-distance commerce, as well as leading the world into a worldwide isolation. People fled to rural areas. This unfortunately also had various impacts on systems of economics. Slowly but surely, the economy was turning into a supply and demand, which also had some positive impacts as well. The feudal system was reinstituted, causing previous serfs to have more freedom than they ever inhibited before. Landlords who previously claimed them peasants were giving them more and demanding more of their services slowly, and causing for wage demand to come back into systems. Instead of working solely on a systematic type of economy, the plague caused for a wage service system to come into tact, which allowed peasants to gain more freedom in the feudal system rather than previously inhibited in civilizations and classic Rome, as well as other empires in trade and other medieval empires.
Even though there are many concerns during the Black Plague, it had caused many effects like social impacts of cultural diffusion, decline in classical world religions, and a shift in economics, causing a major effect in world history.